You're the new winner of the award for hardest person to pick recommendations for. When I first started doing these videos, I used to recommend about 4 to 6 movies per person, and if I was still doing that, this one would be easy. But now that I recommend closer to 20, it was a bit of a challenge. Your 4 favorites are The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Fireworks, Marketa, Lazarová, and Repulsion. The Lord of the Rings is always a challenging one, and you already saw all the obvious choices. So I ended up just trying to come up with fantasy films in general that you haven't already seen. And you didn't have Donkey Skin marked as watched. It's pretty different from your 4 favorites though, because it's a musical and a comedy, but I wanted to recommend it because it's a fantasy like Lord of the Rings, and it stars Catherine Deneuve, who's the star of Repulsion. Speaking of Catherine Deneuve, I also think you might like Belle de Jour. The first movie I wrote down for you was The Virgin Spring because that's what came to mind when I was watching Marketa, Lazarová, and you didn't have that one marked as watched, so that's my top choice for you. Clearly I struggled to come up with fantasy films you haven't already seen, but I think you might like Stardust and Time Bandits. Even though you don't have any animation in your 4 favorites, Castle in the Sky came to mind because it's a fantasy adventure film like Lord of the Rings, and Joe Hisaishi composed the score, and he composed the score for Fireworks. Speaking of Joe Hisaishi, I wrote down another film he composed the score for that I think you might like, and that's Departures. Since Lord of the Rings is also an epic, I noticed you didn't have Lawrence of Arabia marked as watch, and you might like that one. Another epic that came to mind because of the combination of Lord of the Rings and Marketa, Lazarová in your favorites is Aguirre, The Wrath of God. Since Fireworks is a Japanese neo-noir, I think you should check out High and Low and The Bad Sleep Well. Since Fireworks involves detectives and bank robberies, I think you might also like Heat. One of the movies that came to mind when I was thinking of Fireworks was Cure, but you already saw that one. So then I started thinking of other Kiyoshi Kurosawa films, and this is a bit of a stretch, but I think Tokyo Sonata is somewhat comparable to Fireworks, because in Fireworks, an unemployed man is trying to take care of his sick wife, and in Tokyo Sonata, an unemployed man is trying to provide for his family. Since Marketa, Lazarová is considered one of the best Czech films ever made, I think you should check out The Cremator. I struggled with my recommendations based on the first 3 movies in your favorites, but I wrote down quite a few movies that came to mind when I thought of Repulsion, whether they had similar themes, narratives, styles, or vibes, and the ones I think you should check out are Images, Ms. 45, Safe, The Trial, Peeping Tom, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and Pi.